Supports run for their lives as Storm Spirit receives another round of buffs. Who would have thought hitting towers is actually really good? And China truly is number one. I'm your anchor, Chris Tallmaiden, bringing you another episode of the Meta Report. Welcome to the Meta Report, and thank you for tuning in. If you haven't watched the DreamLeague Major and you don't know who won, spoiler alert, it's coming up here in this video. I'll give you a second to close the video if you don't want to watch this, but Vici Gaming beat Virtus.pro in 5 games in the grand finals to take the major and essentially qualify themselves for the international. So how did they do it? How did they beat Virtus.pro, who's been the king of majors for the last 2 years? How did they beat VP at their own aggressive game? Because if you watch the games, you'll notice that Vici Gaming pretty much had the upper hand in every single game from the laning stage on. And that is pretty rare against Virtus.pro. Virtus.pro tends to be a team that wins the lanes, then they crush you in the mid game, and then the game is over. But in these games, Vici Gaming were the ones putting on the pressure from the very early stages. The first thing that I noticed is that Vici Gaming prioritized being on Radiant as much as possible. I don't have access to whether they were picking it actively with their choice, because you usually at tournaments get to choose between either side or first pick or second pick. Regardless of that, Vici Gaming ended up on Radiant 4 out of the 5 games, and the one game they did play on Dire, it definitely showed that they didn't look nearly as comfortable on that side. And as we've talked about in some previous videos, and many people know, there is a discrepancy between Radiant and Dire in terms of win rate. And one of the main reasons that we've kind of hypothesized that that is the case is that the natural flow of the game for Radiant tends to be that you take the Dire safe lane tower, you kind of control the Dire safe lane jungle, while the Dire takes the Radiant safe lane tower and kind of controls the Radiant jungle. But that means that the Radiant naturally is going to be controlling the area around the Rosh pit. And that is a pretty big deal because Roshan obviously is a very important objective to ending the game, especially in a game where fighting is important. The Rosh gold and experience, as well as the Aegis itself, gives you a massive advantage in the current meta. So that was the first thing that I noticed, is that Vici Gaming was definitely prioritizing being on the Radiant side of the map. But it's not just enough to pick a side and then suddenly you automatically get Roshan. That's not how it works. Vici Gaming did another kind of interesting thing next, which is that they generally put a tri-lane to start. And it wasn't a traditional tri-lane. It wasn't just like all 3 heroes are showing bottom the whole time. But it was a tri-lane that was orchestrated to specifically get Paparazzi a couple of kills within the first minute or 2 of the lane. They wanted to kill Pasha, they wanted to kill Roger, and they wanted to force the dual offlane of Virtus.pro out of the lane as quickly as possible, ensuring free farm for their carry. And they put Paparazzi on these carry heroes who have the ability to be aggressive early, but tend to be generally very hard carries overall. So heroes like Terrorblade, Troll, Phantom Assassin, Morphling, Weaver, and Razor were his most picked heroes. And all these heroes scale very well into the late game, but they also have early kill potential because they do quite a bit of damage. They have ability to push towers very early on. And they generally can bully the lane pretty hard by themselves if they have a couple level head start. And that's pretty much what Vici Gaming ensured happened for Paparazzi every single game. You might think, okay, well, why didn't Virtus.pro put a tri-lane against the Vici Gaming tri-lane? And the reason for that is they were mostly playing a dual lane style of Dota. And the reason they had to play this way is because Yang, Vici Gaming's offlaner, was being picked these very aggressive heroes that needed to be addressed by at least 2 heroes to ensure that Ramses had a decent game. Heroes like Brewmaster, Nature's Prophet, Batrider, these are heroes that can really heavily pressure a safe lane carry if he doesn't have any help. So with Virtus.pro stuck in dual lanes, Vici Gaming was able to bring more numbers to their safe lane, which ensured that they won that lane. And the best way to respond to a tri-lane if you cannot beat it with your own tri-lane is to just have the roamer, the position 4, leave the lane or pull the creeps and then leave the lane for the offlaner, because you don't want to be splitting a small amount of experience between 2 heroes. You want it to just be solo experience for the offlaner, since they're not going to be able to get that much anyway. So that's what Virtus.pro did, is they would have Roger be there for a little bit. When he realized he couldn't have any impact, he would go roam. But that meant that Paparazzi was now able to crush the under-leveled Pasha hero in lane very, very easily, and usually with only a little bit of help from his support DY. This then freed up their position 4 to go harass the other lanes, whether it was mid or the Virtus.pro safe lane. And what usually ended up happening is they'd get Paparazzi so far ahead of Pasha's offlane hero that both supports could then rotate to the other lanes and start pressuring the other VP heroes. And another really important part of playing in this way is that Paparazzi then also focused on keeping Pasha's hero down. So Pasha would resort to things like cutting the creep wave or pulling the creep wave and various offlane tricks that you kind of have to employ when you're having a bad game. But then Paparazzi would actively look to try and contest all of these. He wouldn't just be happy with, okay, I'm just getting free farm. He would look to continue to shut Pasha down by himself now because the supports had given him such a big lead. And that's really important because you dedicated so many resources to shutting down the offlane early on that you want to make sure that he continues to be shut down even after the fact. Otherwise, it's just like a minor annoyance for Pasha and he'll be able to continue to come back into the game. The next thing that I noticed Vici Gaming did in their game plan was to focus a lot of attention on taking the mid tower as early as possible. And we've talked about it before in some videos here that the mid tier 1 tower is the most important tower in the game because it controls so much of the map and it allows access to the jungle from 2 different angles if you are able to take it. The way that Vici were able to take the tower early in every single game was, number 1, they would pick a hero that was relatively good at pressuring the waves or pressuring the tower. Number 2, they would use this lead that they'd built for Paparazzi and the fact that their supports were able to leave early to bring a heavy rotation with usually the second catapult wave, so the 10-minute catapult spawn, sometimes even earlier than that. And they would just bring 3 or 4 heroes and just run at the mid tower. And because the VP offlane had gone so poorly, Pasha was not really able to rotate in. And because the 2 supports on the VP side were generally having to deal with their own problems in other lanes, they were not very strong at that point either. Vici also used this opportunity to get their carry active on the map, so they'd often rotate Paparazzi to the mid lane to help with the push, and then in doing so, they'd get him out of the safe lane, which tends to be the most dangerous place for the carry to be after the 10-minute mark. So not only are they claiming the tier 1 tower mid, they're getting their carry active and rotated to another lane where he's safer, and they're also giving themselves access to start ganking and controlling the dire jungle. And pretty soon after taking the tier 1 mid, they would immediately rotate to the top tier 1 if they hadn't taken it already and take that as well. So now they've taken the dire tier 1 mid, they've taken the dire tier 1 top, and suddenly they have pretty strong control of the dire jungle, which is the entire purpose of this strategy. Because if you think about it, we've gone over this many times before, there is less gold on the map, period, because there's less gold from creeps every single wave. And that means that if you can then deny half or more of the jungle camps to the other team, how are they ever going to have enough farm to fight you? They don't. You've taken 2 of their towers, which gives you a big influx of about 1,000 gold per player. And then suddenly you take away a good 25% of their available farm on the map and add it to your own net worth. And because Pasha's offlaner was generally so weakened, he probably hadn't been able to trade the Radiant safe lane tower yet. And this meant that Vici could potentially still defend their safe lane, or they could just extend their map control even further by taking the tier 2s top or mid if VP did try to commit to taking the bottom tier 1 tower on the Radiant side. So pretty much within the first 10 minutes of every single game, Vici would get themselves more map control, they'd get themselves a gold lead from tower gold, and then they would give themselves the ability to extend that gold lead by controlling more farming area on the map. And so the casters were noting that Virtus.pro was playing this very passive style of Dota in the grand finals, but it was forced upon them. Pretty much the only way to play against a team that is stronger than you and has more map control is to split push or fight them. And considering that you generally don't want to fight a team that is stronger than you, split pushing becomes really your only option. And that's kind of what VP had to resort to, because their offlaner was needing to catch up. Their carry was needing to catch up. Their mid was generally doing pretty well, but he can't fight the entire Vici Gaming lineup by himself. And the supports are very underleveled as well, because they're having to try and save all of their other lanes. So as a result, you ended up taking Virtus Pro out of their element, which is running at you playing aggressive, and put them in a spot where they still want to fight you because that's the way that they win the game. That's how they've won games in the past. But if they do fight you, they're probably going to lose because they're at a gold deficit. And that right there is how I think you can apply this to your pub games to win a lot of MMR. If you put a huge focus on taking the mid tier 1 and the safe lane tier 1 of your opponents, you're going to give your team a lot more area to farm. And because in pubs, people generally just fight for the sake of fighting, you're going to be entering these fights with your team with a pretty big gold lead. And that is going to allow you to snowball a lot of games, because if you are taking more farm from the other team and you have a gold lead going into these early game fights, there's basically no way that the other team's going to be able to come back, especially because that requires coordination and communication, which is very lacking in pubs. Virtus Pro, on the other hand, is a team that is very well coordinated and extremely good at the game of Dota 2, and even they struggled to come back from the deficit that they were put at by Vici Gaming in all of these games. They were able to do so by playing around power spikes and taking fights with a specific item or power spike timing. But ultimately, having to play a more passive style of Dota is not something that VP really wants to be doing, because their bread and butter is just owning you from the laning stage until the game's over. So that's it for this week's Meta Report. Thank you so much for tuning in again, and let us know in the comment section below what you thought about the DreamLeague Major and what team you're excited to watch going forward into the next one. Good luck, have fun in your games, and we'll see you in the next video. Hello everyone, and thank you for watching the video. We genuinely appreciate your time and attention spent with us here on the YouTube channel.